It's been 40 years since the Chernobyl disaster. Back then, it was largely viewed as just a massive industrial accident in a faraway land. Radiation had leaked, and many lives were tragically lost. But as they sealed the ground beneath thick concrete, the world believed the disaster would be buried right along with it. But it wasn't. The explosion at Chernobyl reshaped the globe in ways no one could have ever anticipated. It dismantled the seemingly impenetrable Soviet Union, ending the Cold War. It drove Europe away from nuclear power, sparking today's energy crisis. And ultimately, it became ground zero for the long chain of events leading to the Russia-Ukraine war. A massive butterfly effect, stretching from that fateful day in 1986 all the way to our present reality. Let's explore the exact chain of events that triggered this geopolitical tectonic shift. Since 4 decades have passed, let's take a quick step back and look at exactly what happened at Chernobyl. It was April 26th of that year, at exactly 1:23 a.m. A catastrophic explosion ripped through the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, then one of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union. A safety test was actually underway, designed to see if the reactor could be safely cooled in the event of a power outage. But operators pushed forward with the test, blatantly ignoring multiple safety protocols. When this human error collided with a fatal design flaw in the reactor itself, the situation spiraled completely out of control. The scale of the devastation was almost unimaginable. 2 plant workers were killed instantly by the blast. Soon after, 28 firefighters and first responders, who bravely rushed in to battle the blaze and secure the site, died from acute radiation sickness. But tragically, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Right next door to the plant sat a city called Pripyat. Its 50,000 residents, along with 110,000 people from surrounding areas, were forced to abandon their homes. Soon, the number of permanent evacuees swelled to over 350,000. The resulting exclusion zone spanned roughly 930 square miles, an area more than 3 times the size of New York City, left completely abandoned. These people were promised they could return in just 3 days. 40 years later, that promise remains broken. Carried by the wind, the radioactive fallout crossed borders, drifting across vast stretches of northern and western Europe. Some studies estimate that nearly 40% of Europe's landmass was touched by the radioactive fallout in one form or another. But the hardest hit nation of all was neighboring Belarus. Because the winds were primarily blowing north, an estimated 70% of the toxic fallout rained down on Belarusian soil. As a result, 23% of the entire country was contaminated, taking a devastating direct hit. At one point, Belarus was forced to dedicate over 20% of its entire national budget just to deal with the aftermath of Chernobyl. To contain this apocalyptic disaster, Soviet authorities mobilized a massive workforce of roughly 600,000 soldiers, firefighters, and coal miners. Known as the liquidators, they were tasked with the impossible: clearing the highly radioactive debris and sealing the gaping reactor core. The radiation levels were so extreme that remote-controlled robots simply fried and broke down. It had to be done by human hands. The state hailed them as heroes, yet these men were sent into the rubble with little to no protective gear, effectively clearing radioactive graphite with their bare hands. Long-term, environmental groups estimate the true death toll to be anywhere from 90,000 to as many as 200,000. The financial toll is equally staggering, estimated at around $700 billion over the last 4 decades. And with the site expected to remain highly radioactive for tens of thousands of years, this bill is far from fully paid. But the true cost the Soviet government would ultimately pay lay elsewhere. It was the complete collapse of public trust in the state. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, the Soviet regime was desperate to cover it up. Just 60 miles away, in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, they even pushed forward with a massive May Day parade, drawing thousands of unsuspecting people into the streets. But days later, when Sweden detected abnormal radiation spikes, the truth was exposed to the entire world. Realizing their own government had deceived them, the citizens' anger boiled over, becoming the first domino to fall in the collapse of the Soviet Communist Empire. Now, it's entirely possible the Soviet Union would have fallen even without Chernobyl. By 1986, the empire was already rotting from the inside out, drained by the grueling Soviet-Afghan war and crippling military spending. On top of that, global oil prices, their primary lifeline, had plummeted to the modern equivalent of just $24 a barrel, rapidly draining the national coffers. The tragedy is that Chernobyl struck at the absolute worst possible moment. To manage the fallout and relocate hundreds of thousands of people, the state was forced to pour tens of billions of rubles into the disaster, completely bankrupting an already fragile treasury. And it didn't stop there. Roughly 19,000 square miles of fertile farmland, an area the size of Maryland and New Jersey combined, was heavily irradiated, crippling the nation's ability to even feed itself. But even more fatal than the economic ruin was the ideological death blow. The Chernobyl power plant was supposed to be a shining symbol of communist superiority, proving that their science and technology could liberate humanity. Instead, it literally exploded overnight. What truly broke the people's spirit, however, was the realization that their government's cover-up had intentionally left hundreds of thousands of citizens exposed to deadly radiation. Realizing the system couldn't be fixed without exposing its own deep-seated flaws, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev aggressively pushed for glasnost, a policy of openness and transparency. But the results wildly backfired. The newly freed press began exposing decades of state incompetence and corruption, pouring gasoline on the simmering nationalist movements across the various Soviet republics. Feeling sacrificed by Moscow, Ukraine and Belarus, alongside the terrified Baltic states, began declaring their independence from the Union. Finally, on December 25, 1991, the red Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the final time, officially bringing the Cold War to an end. Years later, in his memoirs, Gorbachev would argue, "The collapse of the Soviet Union was not due to the reforms I initiated. Rather, the Chernobyl disaster was the true cause." The butterfly effect of Chernobyl drifted toward Western Europe, coming back to haunt the continent 40 years later, with devastating consequences. Up until then, nuclear power was hailed as the energy of the future, but the radioactive fallout blowing across borders sparked a fierce anti-nuclear movement across Europe. Countries like Germany and Italy scrambled to scale back or outright abandon their nuclear programs, and that void was quickly filled by Russian natural gas. Europe held on to the optimistic belief that tying their economies to Russia would prevent future wars. But in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, that illusion was shattered completely. As gas supplies were cut off, European electricity bills skyrocketed to more than 3 times the US average, gutting the competitiveness of their industries. Ultimately, facing an existential threat, the European Union, led by nations like France, is now pivoting back to nuclear power, sparking a modern nuclear renaissance. It's a massive, ironic chain of events. Europe tried to escape the fallout of an explosion in Ukraine, only to face energy bankruptcy caused by a war in Ukraine, which is now forcing them right back to nuclear power. The third major shift triggered by Chernobyl's butterfly effect is the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. People often view this war as a simple territorial dispute or a conflict over NATO expansion, but its psychological roots lie deep within Chernobyl. The sheer anger of the Ukrainian people, who were forced to bear the brunt of the disaster, culminated in an overwhelming 92% vote for independence in 1991. Paradoxically, the tragedy of Chernobyl gave birth to an independent Ukraine. Even during the 2014 Euromaidan revolution that ousted a pro-Russian regime, Ukrainians took up arms because they knew all too well the devastating price of living under Russian control. Then came 2022. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion, one of its very first targets was capturing Chernobyl. It was the fastest route to their advance, a radioactive hostage to deter NATO intervention, and a calculated provocation, trampling on a space that had become symbolic of Ukrainian independence. This threat was proven yet again in February 2025, when a Russian drone struck the new safe confinement structure built by the international community. Chernobyl is no longer just a disaster of the past. From Russia's perspective, Ukraine is the gateway to Europe and the corridor to the Black Sea. Ukraine's independence, which cost Russia its superpower status, was an unforgivable betrayal. The 2022 war was Moscow's brutal retaliation for a dismantled empire it never accepted. The explosion of 1986 has stopped, but the history it forged is still unfolding. From the collapse of the Soviet Union to Europe's energy bankruptcy, and now the war in Ukraine. Chernobyl was never just a nuclear accident. It was a massive historical inflection point that has spent the last 4 decades reshaping the global order. This has been Olivia with Professor Her. Thank you for watching.